All right. Hello, AMS Nest. I don't know. Can you hear me? Yeah, I see people, at least in the front row, nodding. So people here may not know, but it's been over this past week, we've been doing Climate Emergency Week with UBC Sustainability. And this is kind of our end of week celebration. Yay, thanks, Nadia. Yeah, so I'm Esme.
My name's Anna.
And yeah, we're here representing CJUBC, Climate Justice UBC, and we'll be moderating this event. So we're gonna have a keynote speaker, and we'll get into things more after a few words from Anna.
All right, thank you so much, Esme. Can everybody hear this mic okay? Sound all right? Great, okay. So to kick off our closing of Climate Emergency Week and this event, I first just want to start by acknowledging that UBC's campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, and that this for Musqueam has always been a place of learning. And so in a week that centers a crisis that began with colonization, UBC's commitment to reciprocity and relationship with Musqueam and with Indigenous people is of the utmost importance, and so is its commitment to reckoning with what it means to occupy this land. UBC also owes so much to Musqueam for its insight, advice, and guidance in creating UBC's climate emergency plans, and for all of the input from Musqueam in designing the climate just infrastructure and vision and future for UBC as it continues to occupy these lands. And so I want to express from me and everyone in the room just wholehearted gratitude to Musqueam for hosting us uninvited here and allowing us to do this work. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So yeah, for a brief overview of today's events for this event, we're here like 2 to 3:30. And yeah, so we're gonna start with like a recap from Anna and I of climate wins at UBC and the successes of this week, Climate Emergency Week, which is 2 years out from UBC's Climate Emergency Declaration in 2019. Yeah, 2 years, what? Over 2 years, yeah, cool. So then we'll hear from our keynote speaker, Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm of the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation, which is the first nation to declare a climate emergency. And so, yeah, speaking about what that declaration and transformation means. And then we'll close out with drumming from Victor Barron from the Musqueam Nation, who's a Musqueam language revitalist and drummer who will bring this week of events to a close. Yeah. So thanks for hanging out. And yeah, maybe like message some friends if they would be interested in coming down here or joining on our Zoom as well. So yeah, and I'll just kind of preface a bit. So Anna and I, as I said, are here representing Climate Justice UBC, which is a student group dedicated to political and collective action for climate justice. Collective action means, you know, we're mobilizing together in ways that change how our systems and patterns of life work. And for us, climate justice means like tying environmental issues to social issues and seeing that all of these are inextricably linked to each other. Yeah, so I'll pass it to Anna to kind of go over some climate wins recently. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Esme. And yeah, so the existence of this week is based on the legacy of generations of wins from student and community activism at UBC. Some of those include, to start off, the UBC climate strike back in September 2019, which brought out more than 5,000 people, and then led to UBC's declaration of full divestment from fossil fuels in 2019 and the declaration of the climate emergency. After that, the Climate Emergency Task Force over a year created a list of more than 84 recommendations and a report for what this university can actually do to transform its research, its institutional power, and its social capital toward being a vehicle for climate justice. It's been 1 year since the Board of Governors endorsed that report in principle, but we're still waiting right now for full, sustained, and committed funding to make those recommendations happen. We also have at UBC the Climate Action Plan 2030, which is the plan for getting UBC's campus emissions to zero, as well as the Indigenous Strategic Plan, engaging UBC's resources and institutional power toward relationships with Indigenous people, especially in connection to where our campus is based. We also now have a Center for Climate Justice, and we also have, over the course of this week, put together a whole series of events highlighting how UBC can mobilize its resources, its energy, and its brain power toward the climate emergency.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, this week, as we've said, marks the 1-year anniversary of UBC's endorsement of the climate emergency recommendations. So throughout this week, we've gotten the chance to engage across campus communities and spaces to discuss what the climate emergency means for us. So on Monday, we heard from Dr. Ingrid Waldron and UBC's Temitope Onefade on climate justice. On Tuesday, we had our online roundtable in which students had the chance to discuss the 9 major areas of the climate emergency recommendations together. On Wednesday, students got to participate in a dialogue with campus leaders. And on Thursday, we heard from campus community partners working on initiatives for climate justice on campus. And yeah, so today we also heard from amazing scholars on this morning's research panel. And now we're here to celebrate this cross-community collaboration and encourage that collaborative energy to continue going forward.
Thank you, Esme. And so we've now come to the end of this week, which is culminating this whole series of events, putting UBC's minds together for how we can collectively transform this institution toward climate justice. And we're here because of a series of wins from student and community activism. Our question next, as we go forward from this week, is what would it look like, instead of just conceding to student and community demands, if UBC took the initiative on addressing the climate crisis? What if UBC committed to turning all of its funding, its social capital, its brain power, its research capacity into creating a climate just world? Some of this is already happening thanks to the hard work of dedicated individuals on campus. I really want to shout out the Center for Climate Justice, creating Canada's first body of scholarship around climate justice, as well as the Peter Wall Institute under the leadership of Dr. Vanessa Andriotti, now turning itself into a research institute for solving climate crisis problems. I want to ask what else would happen as we go forward from this week if UBC committed its own sustained and central funding to moving on its commitments to the climate emergency. So we've got this declaration, but now how do we move into transformation? And probably nobody can answer that question better than our upcoming keynote speaker, Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Nadia Joe to introduce our keynote. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't expecting that. I'm not the main event. Just hold on to that thought. But I thank you for that enthusiasm, and I really do want to bring that type of enthusiasm for our next guest speaker. So I'll introduce myself briefly in Jawa and Squashkiko. My English name is of course Nadia Joe, and I comprise 1/2 of the newly established UBC Climate Emergency Team. I joined here at UBC just here in September with my co-manager. Many of you probably know him. Many of you heard, yes, exactly. Thank you, Megan, for pointing about the ever kind, the ever noble, the ever generous Mr. Pablo Barron. Yeah, give it to him. He earned that. He deserves that. So we joined to really help advance UBC's ambitious but really, really necessary climate response. And just to be clear that we do not carry the weight of this responsibility alone. We continually look to the leadership all around us, in front of us here, beside us, to help guide us in addressing the urgency, the care, the community that we need to confront this crisis. Because what's really been at the heart of this climate emergency week for us has been an opportunity for us to continue creating the connections that we need, building the community among all campus partners that are working towards a just and sustainable future. Because as our planet confronts the reality of what the code red for humanity signals for us, it's not enough just to engage our cognition in understanding our world and our place in it. We can't just talk our way through this. We really need to learn and relearn the practices and the stories that activate our creative and our hopeful capacities. We need to learn the practices that reorient us towards the care, for the health, the well-being of our planet, and all the living communities that depend on it. Because if we get this wrong, nothing else matters. In light of the moment that we find ourselves in, with these parallel pandemics of racism, of fascism, of COVID-19, this is a moment in time that we must really start to question how we've done things in the past. And we have to challenge ourselves to take the risks, to reimagine our futures together. We need to search for the stories that matter and that can help us to restore and restory our world. And so our next speaker is someone who is going to help us in this search. So we're closing out Climate Emergency Week with our most distinguished guest, Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm from the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation, whose community of Old Crow, Yukon has been directly experiencing the effects of climate change for decades. As the youngest elected chief of the Vuntut Gwitchin, Chief Dana has no problem setting precedents. He's advocated successfully at COP25, among other climate gatherings, to ensure that Indigenous ways of knowing and being on the land are integrated into the work of decolonizing our modern economies. He was the first Indigenous chief to pass a climate emergency declaration 7 months prior to UBC declaring theirs. So much for UBC's leadership. So this year he was named one of Clean 50's emerging leaders for outstanding contributors to clean capitalism. But for me, the real story here is not about Dana's climate leadership. Instead, this is a love story, and I'll let him tell it. Please help me welcome Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm.
Asicho Shalaknai, Drintlan Gwinzi, Ojri Dana Tizya-Tramm Baji, Chitnali Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation teach it. Good day, all of my relations. Thank you. My name is Dana Tizya-Tramm, and I am the chief of the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation. I really appreciate this opportunity that I have today, because at the end of the day, this opportunity is a moment that I have with your hearts and your minds, and I will endeavor to reach through the trivia and marry intellect with experiences to create knowledge, but more importantly, to empower you. To do this, we must face the trifecta of Indigenous technologies, which are societal technologies. Today, I will bring you through the power of story, the power of relationship, and the power of our love, basically. Story is a technology. It's a huge economy pusher with Hollywood. Everybody enjoys a story. We are enwrapped and enthralled in these, from family members to Hollywood. So what is our story? The great story of the Great Spirit and our universe starts back at 13.8 billion years ago. The story of our mother, the Earth, over 4 billion years ago. 5 billion in the coalescing and the beginning of the planet as we know it. In another sense, and through metaphorically, our DNA is simply telling a story of the animals, remembering each step as it advances. And in this way, we can realize and look backwards and see that we are all the story of our ancestors. The very voice that I speak to you with now is not my own. It was carried from the hard work of my ancestors through generations to arrive so I may carry it for future generations. And I will use this voice as I carry it now to be a window into a different time and space outside of the linear trajectory of modern society as we know it today. So let's take that journey. For us, the Gwich'in, we began around 30,000 years ago as we know it today. In fact, there is an archaeological dig just 30 kilometers outside of my community at Bluefish Caves with possibly one of the oldest human sites of presence in the North Americas, at carbon dating to about 24,000 years ago. Today, the oldest known site of a human being is in the Yucatan Peninsula, a 16-year-old girl at 16,500 years. So this is pretty much double that. Our people came to these lands, and I still carry the stories from those people today, a story stretching back to the Beringia period. Our people taught the newcomers, the Vuntut, about the giant beavers. Nobody believed us until they found the fossils. When scientists came to our community, my elders told them the creeks in which they would find woolly mammoths. And eventually they did, because we remembered that's where we chased the woolly mammoths to immobilize them when we hunted them. This is just to give you an idea of how calibrated our storytelling and our long stories are. In this way, it is like a societal technology. Our oral traditions and our histories are like an entity. I call her the grandmother of Vuntut Gwitchin. All of our stories are pooled, and the only reason stories and knowledge get remembered and make it is because it makes us a better people, whether with one another or survival in one of the most hospitable areas, inhospitable, in northern Yukon, or as we remember it, Gwich'in. My community of Teachit, Old Crow, is nestled between the Crow Mountain and Porcupine River, 80 miles north of the Arctic Circle. It is the only community in Yukon with no road access. You can only get in by skidoo, walking, dog team, or plane. Our people have been through these lands since time immemorial. We speak of the first Gwich'in man in these lands, who once he came across these lands, he told his family to stop, and he traveled around the lands, shrinking the animals with his medicines to pacify and make it safe for his families. This actually aligns quite nicely with Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel and anthropological records of wherever humans showed up, the megafauna disappeared. They were the easiest to hunt. Throughout my journey and my life, digging into my story, I am one who sits on the fence, as my father is an immigrant from Germany, my mother, Gwich'in on her lands for generations. And now I see these two worlds that I present to you today. One is the natural world, and another is the human world. And as Yuval Noah Harari writes, you can dissect a human cell and you will not find a declaration for human rights. Now, what did he mean by this statement? Indigenous law is taken from Diinehdoo and Kekwanak, from creators, from the land itself. The law of man was made by man, but the law of nature is one that we must respect as well, as the laws of nature led to our very being, allowed the 107 ribonucleic acids to create their chemical bonds that gave rise to the first single cells and amoebas. In fact, the very heart beating in your chest today is the genetic memory of when we were in the oceans. Such a beautiful kinship that we have with all of our brothers and sisters, as are the animals, as well as the plants. Our relationship runs very deep, but today, with the human world superimposed on this natural one, we have forgotten many of our connections. And I had too. until researching and reaching back through my family, I was subject to the topical winds of pop culture, of economies, blowing around like a tumbleweed in the cities. Until I dug through our histories and my family's story, I realized that I was but a bud on an old twig branching from an ancient branch, a part of a prehistoric tree that's roots dig deep into the earth. The story on both sides of my family I can trace back to before recorded history. So going back to our first Gwich'in man, that is when we had moved into these lands. You would think that it was inhospitable up in the north, but very opposite so. Our regions, the salmon pulse through the rivers, the caribou move from Ji'heezrit from their calving grounds through northeast Alaska, running today the last largest land animal migration species left on Earth, over 210,000 running strong today. The moose were in our areas. We were rich with food, and the land taught us how to capitalize on the resources in a balanced manner and ourselves balanced with all things. As we were forced to discern the web of invisible relationships that existed between the plants and the animals, so we could see and take place our vacuum within this great kaleidoscope of nature. Now, recently, we had come across the outsiders. We have many names for them. The Onjit, the outsiders, the Vanoglit, they become many among us. But in 1898 was the major gold rush. And we went from about 300 outsiders or non-Indigenous peoples in the Yukon territory to 3,000. And this vastly changed everything. We were a subspecies to these colonists, whereas we know today that there is no genetic evidence of human race, but human race does exist to us as people. Again, the natural world and the human world, a big difference. We invited the outsiders in. My ancestors would work with anybody as long as we had mutual respect for one another. We never pushed anyone out of our regions. And in fact, Yukon is one of the only areas where there were not Indian wars, where we did not fight with the outsiders. But when the 3,000 influx came, we could not stop. And the changes still continue today. But with the right set of eyes in my community, you can see the last waves of colonialism that broke on the rocks of my community. My people still holding on to stories reminiscent of a very different time. And these stories I share with you willingly today, as all of our stories are one, all of our ancestors working the same way, deserving the same respect, going all the way through the chain of animals, all the way into the plants. We are their story. We are the story of the earth. But now the earth is telling us something different. And I would argue that it is telling us more about ourselves than itself. The earth now is perfectly reflecting the imbalanced psyche in which we've approached it. And believe me, my people are experts in that. As we were approached with an imbalanced psyche, we were seen as lower. The Indigenous people in Canada could not vote until the 1960s. My elders tell me stories of gathering 3 of them on a street corner, and the RCMP came and broke them up. They weren't allowed to gather. These are the populations that I'm from and the stories that my people have. Recent. We had always been a strong people, healthy people, vibrant. We had no poor people until we came up against this modernity. But what is it that this modernity really is? What is this human world or this human story, this chapter that we are writing? To me, I liken it to a parasite. A parasite enters its host and it makes the host crave the nutrients or whatever the parasite needs. Not necessarily capitalism in our economies, which are just tools. They work very well. And in a murder, you wouldn't blame the gun. It's the person who wielded the gun, the intentions that we used these tools. But if we forget who we are, the tools will begin wielding you. And I believe that's really where our story of this generation really begins. In a populace, in a world where people have forgotten our identities and we are being wielded by our tools, these inhospitable, unworldly, synthetic ideas living through us. And we are rewarded with fake glittering prizes of status, of stature, and bank accounts, when you can eat none of those. You cannot bring any of that with you. It has never been valued from my people's point of view, who have lived for millennia on our lands. Now all of this has changed. It is the ideas that we pass among one another. They do not care of caste or creed, and they can plant like one petri dish to another. Racism has no merit, no scientific or logical merit, but it can spread. Think of a young child in a racist family and what do you expect them to grow up as? This too are some of the ideas that we have inherited and we have carried and been carried to our times that are not our own, have now brought a major imbalance to the planet. Climate change did not begin in the Industrial Revolution, where we bent steel, steam, and rubber to emit greenhouse gases in exponential volumes. Climate change began when we began looking at the earth as below us, not the same or equal to. In that moment was born the crisis that you and I live today. So when we get to today, our climate change declaration was an effort between myself and one of our lawyers, a great mind, a young Gwich'in, Chris Statnick. I looked across the inheritance of my office, looking at the landscape of my people, the intergenerational traumas of the residential school system, of which I am a second generation. So I know about this firsthand. I looked at the needs of our people, the journey of self-government, no longer under the Indian Act, but still the same systemic problems dealing with governments, territorial or federal. As a young man, having to educate ministers about the agreements their country had signed. I looked at all of these different needs, the modernity, the slipping of our languages, the mental health issues, seemingly insurmountable problems, and climate change on top of all of this. And let me tell you what it is that we're seeing in my community. Everything that you can touch, taste, hear, and experience has changed or is changing. And this correlates what my elders are saying exactly with studies around the world. I have recently read a New York Times article, the first of its kind, a study on bird studies. And it deduces that there's been a 60% loss of bird populations across North America. Or as one of my elders put it, Trimble Gilbert from Vashraiko Arctic Village in Alaska. He said that the birds are no longer singing to the Gwich'in people, which is heartbreaking as a young man. This elder spent his life on the land, hunting, healthy, providing for his families. And during the summer, when there's 24 hours sunlight, the whole world, as it seemed, was a cathedral, and the birds, its choir, singing at all hours of the night. That is no longer happening. The bugs are changing. We're seeing different kinds of bugs now. Last year, our Porcupine River was bone dry. It was 50% lower than I or anyone else had ever seen it before. The winter before that summer, there was absolutely no snow. I drove out on our frozen river a half an hour out of our community, and there was 1 inch of snow in the forest. I'd never seen that before, and neither had our elders. I stood on that bank, a young leader, looking out at the world, wondering what this meant. How shall I bear this and honor our people in finding a way forward, breaking a trail through new landscapes? It weighs heavy on my heart. Our salmon populations are dwindling. The caribou are moving differently. We no longer can understand why they're moving the way that they are. Our rivers, the cliffs are slipping into them, occluding them, damaging the fish populations. Our forests are being overgrown with willow, which is becoming extremely aggressive. Our lakes are draining into river systems. Permafrost is changing. The animals are changing. We're now seeing cougars up in our area, which we had never seen before as well. But it's not such a surprise to my elders. As I had heard, they had been speaking about this over 40 years ago. They started seeing changes. But just like when we had warned the outsiders, now our partners, about these changes, we were not listened to. But now the entire world is talking about this. So how can we as an Indigenous people with so much to share, a completely different sociological evolutionary line than modern society and its greatest homogenizer, the television? We had a different sense of space and time. We did not we were a master of time until the clock was introduced, and then it became our master. Everything that we know had changed. We have so much to share with the world. I staunchly believe that my people are holding on to truths like a serum, like a vaccine. And when the world is ready, we will share all of our stories, our truths with the world, but the world has to be ready to listen. My people have been trying to help the world and everyone through their humble beauty and their strength. Even though we've been wronged time and time again, my elders still teach that you must be there for them, for the Southerners, that there will be hard times to come in the future, and that Gwich'in must be there to help. These are the teachings of my people, which goes into relationship. Our relationships are so strong among one another that actually we have an interchronological community as well. There are community members who have been long since passed, over a century, that are still alive and well in our community, talked about their teachings and stories every day. And we have a relationship with the next generation unborn, who are a vital part of all of our meetings. They are discussed daily. Our sense of community is very strong. So how could we invite the world into this, looking at all of these different issues? That is where our climate emergency declaration comes into play. And I welcome people to go onto our government website at vgfn.ca, and you can find our climate declaration. It is a piece of work mostly about its perspective. For instance, that the International Panel on Climate Change and scientific reports support our traditional knowledge. It is uplifting and in a good way, bringing our cultures side by side, not one over the other. It was an Indigenous view. And with about 18 hours of work into the words and 10 cents of computer paper, we signed a declaration that rang true throughout the world. The same year that we signed our declaration, Parliament signed an emergency climate declaration about 7 months after ours. Our climate declaration spurred the Yukon government to declare a climate declaration on an emergency. Same with local municipalities. I was getting calls from parliamentarians in Australia. Moreover, as a permanent participant of the Arctic Council, an international consensus-based table of the 8 Arctic nations and permanent participants as the Indigenous peoples, as well as observers from around the world. The Indigenous Peoples Secretariat took about 60% of this declaration verbatim, and it was passed internationally, circumpolar across the Arctic Circle. The Indigenous peoples adopted a climate change emergency. Now, why is this important? And I've had some people ask, then what? And how is that a major part of solutions? The name of our declaration is pronounced Yeendoo, Diinehdoo, Ji'heezrit, Nits'oo, Ts'o, Na'an. It came from one of our elders, and it means, translated, after our time, how will the world be? And that's something we should all ask, truly ask to ourselves. After our time, how will this world be? We do not know yet, but this is an important question that we need to be asking ourselves, no matter what our positions are. Because here's another lesson that I have learned through international politics. I actually had coffee one morning with Mike Pompeo, the international representative for the Trump administration. And I'll tell you, there is not a single truth. There are 3 truths. There is a personal truth, a political truth, and an objective truth. We cannot occlude the light of objective truths through our personal or political lenses. Back again to dividing the human cell and not finding a declaration for human rights. The land doesn't care if you are a moose, a muskrat, or a man. All of your lessons are the same. And the ultimate teaching from nature is that it banks on diversity and rewards cooperation. Our differences should not be political fodder to push us away from one another. Our differences are our strength. That is the power in community. And this is how we need to be approaching this issue. Because where I will go is, I believe community is the ultimate solution to the climate change issue. But let's keep going. How can a climate declaration be part of a solution? I can tell you, I don't purport to be a genius, a political mastermind, anything than who I really am, just myself. But this document and this piece of paper started conversations right across the country. It actually spurred another climate declaration in Alaska, internationally. This went international. Now, going back to the parasitic form of thought, like racism and the other isms that do not serve ourselves to be better people or make a better world, basically untruths. The opposite is true as well. More powerful than any government or any weapon is an idea that's time has come. The international political landscape, personal and objective landscapes were primed like a dry forest, and one spark drove it ablaze. And now everyone is affronted with these conversations. This is very important. Organizations are talking with each other differently. In fact, for instance, with UBC's declaration and their emergency declaration, Vuntut having an emergency declaration, I can now reach across the table to Yukon government, to the Canadian government, to other international governments, and we have the same mandate. And the beautiful thing is, this is the first time I've seen modern countries taking their mandates from the earth, as we have always, as Indigenous peoples. Around the planet, it's the same. We are all for biodiversity. We are all for sustainable communities and renewability. And we're all about learning from what I call the language before words, the language in which plants and animals are speaking to us, because they are. It's just not in English. They tell you in and of themselves about their health, about the different effects in their environments, and as do we. It's all a story. It's just whether we're listening or not, if we're humble enough to hear it. In fact, if we really strip this issue bare down, the earth will be fine. As one of my elders told me, he said, the earth can heal itself, much like our body does with a fever, a sickness. It can clean its body. Our only decision is whether we want to be there with the earth in the future or not. If man falls, if the human species immolates itself in the climate catastrophe, it will just be another animal's time. But what a sad ending to a beautiful story of the human population. And what do I mean by that? If we are going to approach this issue as also teachings from my people, we can never approach it out of a place of anger, of hate, of darkness. This takes strength. Your heart and your mind, what is in them, the world needs it. The world depends on you to be healthy of heart and mind, to seed the right ideas in the forest of your minds, to become the medicine that the world needs. And over leadership, we need courage. More than any politician or corporation, it's going to take everything that we have. But we are fully and wholly capable of this. Let me tell you firsthand. Now my community has built one of the largest solar farms in the circumpolar north, of over 2,000 bifacial solar panels that eliminates 24% of my community's energy needs, like displacing 600 vehicles off the road as diesel is flown to my community. And even more interesting, we have struck an incredible electricity purchase agreement where we are now selling sunlight to the utility ATCO shareholders in displaced savings from flying diesel through their diesel generators. Our community has now unlocked over $410,000 a year by selling sunlight. And these solar panels exist right beside our berry patches, which our elders still harvest today. Both technologies utilizing the same science. Indigenous peoples employing the utmost of scientific technology, the cutting edge, to realize our Indigenous values. Again, going back to the economies, to tools, they're just tools. If you use a gun to harvest a buffalo for your family, that's fine. But if you take out the whole buffalo species, that is not. What are your intentions? It's not the tool's fault. We must take responsibility. The climate change diagnosis is much the same of a terminal diagnosis. It is like going to the doctor and the doctor telling you, you have a few years to live. Your first emotional response will be denial. This can't be. I feel fine. Next, you will move into anger, then into bartering, and finally into acceptance. I've gone through all of these myself. We have to, as a populace, get through the denial. Sticking our head in the sand is not going to do anything. We need to get past our anger. Throwing rocks and being at the front of protests. Protests are a small part, but they are a part of the solution, not violence or throwing rocks. We can't barter our way out of this. As individuals, we must go through every stage that the human world as a whole must go through. And then once we come to a place of acceptance, we must engage it truthfully. And here comes the power of dreaming. When I sat at my desk, when the Trump administration had gone in, I was working late nights. My mandate from my people was to save the porcupine caribou herd from their lands being developed. I sat there as a young man, looking through the window of my desk on an international landscape upheaved by the tectonic plates of the Trump administration, and I had no idea how I was going to do this. I'm happy to report that today, every major bank in North America and international funds up to $1 trillion worth have instilled policy that they will not fund any development in the Arctic refuge, or as we know it, Ji'heezrit. You have all the power that you need. In fact, in my prayer, which is just my own personally, I do not ask Creator for anything because I believe that Creator has given us everything already. It is now up to us to honor the story that we have been given. Like a great Shakespearean play, we are the monarchs and the princes for actors, the world its stage. After our time, how will the world be? I did not know how I was going to move forward in protecting the caribou, but I had a dream. I had a dream of my people continuing to feed their babies caribou broth, for our babies to continue to teethe on their bones, for young men to bring caribou back to my community and give to single mothers and to our elders. And that dream, in the fog of war and the opaque international politics, it began to form an idea of where my feet might land, which gave me the strength to jump. Your dreams, as the generation burdened with possibly the most important decisions in the trajectory of humankind, yes, is very much unfair. It was not your doing. You are not responsible for this, but we can take responsibility for ourselves, honor our ancestors by developing the most beautiful platform of what we are able to when we dig from this infinite place, not from ourselves, through your heart and mind, through your ancestors deep into the earth. We can give from an infinite place. I don't care what the issue is. I have a dream. I have a dream of all of our generations in the future living together. And now, something very important to share with you. I have referred to some of the outsiders, the colonials, as Van Noglit, they become many among us, or the Onjit, the outsiders. Our first term for the outsiders were the Tizya-Gwitchin, which meant those who dwell under stone because of their brick and stone houses. I am Vuntut Gwitchin, the people of the many lakes. In Northeast Alaska, we have the Gwitchin, the people of the high plains. To the east, we have the Gwitchin, the people of the headwaters. For lack of a better term, white people, we called Tizya-Gwitchin. those who dwell under stone. My wife is from Singapore. I call her Ji'heezrit Gwitchin, the people of the sunrise. Each one of you are Gwich'in as well. You are a people. I am Gwich'in. You are Gwich'in. We are our stories of our ancestors here together. This community is what we need. We need to make community with one another. And the point in community is it's my duty, as my elders have taught me, to empower you, to give you power, to strengthen your heart, to strengthen your mind, which I've shared with you many of these ideas and a few stories. But let me share one with you, a modern traditional story, I guess you could say. This is the power of knowledge, bestowing intellect, and the power of story and community and love. My little niece, I would take her to the forest line and put her down, and I'd tell her, okay, tell uncle where to go. At 4 years old, and she began going out, and I would follow her because I'm trying to teach her to be a leader, not to follow others. Well, one day, going through the forest, we came to a break in the canopy, and there was a shaft of sunlight on a thorn bush, and there was one vibrant, beautiful pink flower in the middle of that bush. And my niece looked at that flower and gasped, and she said, "Uncle, look at that flower, it's beautiful." And I picked her up and I told her, "Baby, this is your grandmother. I want to introduce you to her." And she looked at me and said, "No, uncle, it's not." And I said, "Yes, baby, this is your grandmother." And I brought her over to that flower. And I said, "Can you see the veins in the petal?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Look at your hand. Can you see the veins in your hand?" And her brow furrowed. And she looked at me and said, "Yeah." And I told her, "These are all your grandfathers and your grandmothers." And the moment I had said that, a breeze came through the forest and all the trees began to dance. And she looked at them with reverence, with love. And in that moment, she had a connection with them, not just intellect or trivia, but knowledge, a kinship. They weren't just its economical value or their biological function, but a relationship. We as humans, we left the jungles 250,000 years ago. We did it together. This is how we must honor our story. We must approach the climate change together. We must clean our hearts and our minds, look after yourself and others to be able to do this in a good way. Destroying yourself with concern and with worry is not going to help. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to find this infinite place in which to have patience and perseverance? This is a question I cannot answer for you, but one in which took me many years to come to today. How are we going to create these communities? These communities and these inalienable ideas, because ideas are not something we make up. Truth does not need us to believe in it to exist, but a lie does. A lie needs us to believe in it, to give it power, to give it strength, to share, to spread among us, but truth doesn't. We need to, as this generation, make these communities around these objective truths, to realign our personal, our political truths, to not point fingers at one another, but point fingers of where we are going, and do so in an inclusive way. My people have used these tools to live with one another for millennia in the Arctic Circle, by creating strong relationships with one another, by paying attention to the land and making the land a part of our relationship as well, and taking of these objective truths. I do not see enough of this happening in the modern world. I think an easy person to pick on, the Trump administration, but even this administration themselves are telling us about our society. They're teaching us about what some of the glittering prizes, what people are seeking, what people think power is, all these different aspects. I'm here to tell you as a leader, I have no power. I take my mandate from my people. I actually have less power by leaving as a citizen to become this leader. And I saw everything as a young man and did not want to be part of society. But now I see that being a part of the solution is even stronger. As an Indigenous man, I did not even stand up for the Canadian anthem, but I've changed that. Now I will get into the heart of Canada. I will be the most Canadian, and I will get into Canada's heart and change it from the inside out. Do all of these things in a good way from my heart, not from my fist. And it's the same thing with climate change. You cannot let it anger you or defeat you. You must love it. Bring love back to our planet. Honor our stories and pass them on to your grandchildren. Create these relationships and communities waiting for you. This is where we went wrong. This is where climate change began, in the subjugation of one another, in the delineation of one another and the earth as something separate from all of us, when we are the story of the earth and our ancestors' dreams. No matter where these truths you channel them, you can and must create this change. The world is waiting for you. And I'm here to tell you, you have everything you need, all of the strength. And we must do this together. You are my brothers and my sisters. These are the communities we need to keep establishing and keep moving forward, because I will always be moving forward with you as well. There are millions of us. We can make this change, and we must, because I believe in a beautiful ending to this great story. We are fully capable of this. Masicho, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Dana. Thank you so much for speaking to us today, and thank you for your powerful words. I really appreciate what you said at the end. I really appreciate your whole speech. First off, I think everybody in this room really appreciates you being here, and maybe just one more round of applause. And thank you so much for your message of power to us, and for saying that we have what we need in our hands already in an institution like UBC, and with the power that comes with it to create that kind of transformation that you talked about.
Yeah. And I think that what we've been seeing like over this week, over the past few years, is this like collective community coming together at the speed of trust, is what I like to say, what I've heard. At the speed of trust, as we build these relationships really genuinely, and get to know the land and our communities in a way that is really meaningful. And yeah, I think that it's been really nice to connect and get to share and hear stories. I especially appreciate your story about yeah, being in the forest and teaching leadership in this way. Yeah, really beautiful. Yeah, do we want to share some ways that people can continue to get involved and see how we already have the tools in front of us to keep building this community?
Yeah, so on that note, we have a couple last things to share before we close out the ceremony. And the first of those is, I want to, I think we had a QR code, but we don't anymore. But we have a list of actions connected to Climate Emergency Week. to help take this institution and this declaration further. And you can find them on the Climate Emergency Week website and when you sign up for these events. We also, Asmi and I have been running this campaign to try to get sustained climate emergency funding from the university to turn this declaration into action. And you can still sign in letters to the Board of Governors. You can go to tinyurl.com/JVC-deliver, and we'll write that down too, to send them a message to keep up this declaration and this transformation.
Yeah, in that context, the UBC Board of Governors Finance Committee got to meet about the budget for next year yesterday morning. And yeah, the letters that we've been sending so far have definitely been noticed. So it's really exciting. Yeah, we also have with the UBC sustainability, I've heard that the Sustainability Ambassadors application is out and deadline is coming up. Definitely encourage folks to apply for that opportunity. It's a really great way for students to get to connect with the team of yeah, being ambassadors for UBC and putting together things like the upcoming Sustainable Development Goals Week, which is the first week of March.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so to close us out today, this is the last event of Climate Emergency Week. Thank you so much for being here and for sitting through. And thank you so much again to Chief Dana for bringing all the way, bring your message all the way down to UBC here. To close us out, I would have the honor to introduce. Oh, okay. Actually, I'm not going to close this out in a couple. We'll wait just a minute before we close this out officially.
Yeah, I guess we can also share recently Climate Justice UBC just had our kickoff. And so if you're interested in joining a group of, really like loving and understanding students who are interested in political and collective action around climate justice, check out the Climate Justice UBC orientation form. It's tinyurl.com/CJUBC-orientation. And one of our orientation folks will meet up with you and get you brought into the community. I was also wondering, do we have a video we don't have the video, but there was a shoreline cleanup going on, I believe. Wasn't that Kits Beach today? Okay. And is it still true that people can drop by till like 6 p.m.? Yeah. So on Kits Beach, one of the undergraduate societies as part of AMS Sustainability Week, they're running a shoreline cleanup, and people can feel free to still drop by before 6 p.m. And also just like enjoy the beach on not too crowded day probably. But yeah. I think we also have our table over here with the lovely Climate Hub folks. So if you want to check out some other things over there, we have some people who would love to connect with you.
And I think maybe right before we close it out, we can also just go through a couple of thank yous to people for putting this week together. First off, I just like my hugest gratitude and such a massive thank you again to Nadia, Joe, and Pablo Beimler, who put this whole entire week together and who are coordinating UBC's climate emergency response. And then also a massive shout out to Megan Wise, who is the coordinator of the UBC Climate Hub. And also carrying this work forward in the complicated and bureaucratic institutions of UBC, all three of them putting their heads together to turn this declaration into something meaningful and actionable. Thank you, all of you. Also, just a huge shout out to Tim Heron and John Garner, wherever John went, for our tech setup and for always being there to create the kind of infrastructure and the kind of tech for events like this. And a thank you to Giselle Geddick, who is helping us set up. Thank you also to everybody who's been tabling. I see like M's in the audience, a number of people for putting together our outreach for this week. And any other thank yous you want to add on, Esme?
Yeah, thanks also to all of our volunteers throughout the week, facilitating breakout rooms and Zoom events, note-taking, and putting together, written memories of all the discussions we've been having throughout the week. I want to thank our partners from the different roundtables, Climate Justice UBC, student volunteers, the Climate Hub, and yeah, just everybody who made this week possible. It's been great to work together. Absolutely.
Yeah, and our last, again, thank you to Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm for your keynote today and for greeting us all. Thank you so much. And lastly, I would love to I'm introducing Victor Barron, who's going to drum us out to close off the ceremony. And so Victor is a linguist and a Hunkaminam speaker and a Hunkaminam language revitalist, and is going to close off this week by, with your drum. Thank you so much.
Long set we are through Easter, this awareness to come ita Oxford, the Spotlight, you were Halito, the Tum Spotlight, this Petlican, you were Sasa, but this way, Spotlight, the Husband, you were Yimik at the Tum, stay at the Sneam, Spotlight, the Cutman, you were eat some Hilata, still talk, Louis, Oxford. Steven, number stay. Square, the lead, the sneamers. Our set to culminate, come up in a spot like what see. It's in Italum, Elam, Thomas still eat Philip still, the need must be you Startleston at the answer, the St. Laws. You Tam, Elam. Police at Tizya-Tramm, the awareness, you are Metal, it's in the Tamu, the Sisu Theater, the police, it's Mitas at the Dear friends and relatives, you've heard my introduction, my name, my English name. Dear friends and relatives, you heard in the introduction that my English name is Victor Barron. I hail from the Musqueam First Nation. I'd first like to thank the organizers for bringing this event together. I'd like to thank our friend, the chief among the Gwich'in people, for his words. Much of what I have to say will echo what he had to say. Our people have always lived on these lands. Our people have been here for as long as this land has existed, because our people have always lived at the ocean shore and followed the ocean shore as it extended westward, as the delta extended westward. Our people don't have the notion that we're the only ones that Creator has bestowed souls upon. We believe that all of our brethren that share this home with us have also had their souls bestowed upon them by the Creator. Our brethren, feathered brethren that fly in the air above us, the four-legged brethren that walk the earth as we do, our fin brethren that swim in the lakes, rivers, and ocean that surround us. The water, the plants, the rocks, even the earth itself, all have souls just as we do. And this is where our people's beliefs that we must respect the home within which we live just as much as we respect ourselves. So in closing today's event, I'd like to share with you a song that's known to our people both as a song of greeting and a song of parting. And the reason it's known that way is because it's really a song that calls upon the spirits of the Creator and the ancestors to watch over us when we embark upon a new journey. And it's also used when we safely reach our destination to thank them for safely watching us safely reach our journey's end. And I use this song because what we're doing right now in reforming the way we behave toward the earth and our brethren that live on the earth with us is embarking upon a new journey. I've said, see you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, friends and relatives. And I'll turn the floor back over to Nadia.
Okay, Chief Dana, I think we're going to say goodbye. Thanks very much for your.
Okay, thank you very much.